What emerging technologies or theoretical technology, that could really go wide, do you believe are most promising for anti-authoritarian disruption? Similar to how
That's a leading question.
Similar to how Bitcoin disrupts government control of money, maybe. I'm very interested in crypto and blockchain. You mentioned blockchain earlier, so I'm gonna.
Too bad we don't have Naval here.
Yeah,
That'd be awesome.
I know.
Yeah.
But I would be curious to hear first your thoughts, just general thoughts on crypto and blockchain, and then any other emerging technologies that you think are promising for anti-authoritarian disruption.
Okay. So I hope this isn't a shaggy dog answer, but
I don't even know what that is, but it
shaggy
sounds
dog
good.
story is like a really long story that never
yeah.
ends. But so for better or worse, I'm a little bit of a history buff when it comes to business, and so I took this class when I was in business school, and only Harvard Business School would have a class called "The Coming of Managerial Capitalism," and but it was a fascinating class because
Sexy name, rolls off the tongue.
Like for example, like in the year 1820, there weren't any companies in America with more than 100 employees. You know, because you had people selling muskets or fur, or like if you were a really big monster company, you were like a spinning loom in Waltham, Massachusetts, and spinning yarn and fabric. Well, then the railroad and the steam engine come out, and that changes everything. So like what people don't realize about people like John Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan and Andrew Carnegie, like imagine you're doing Standard Oil and you want to compete with the guy in Pennsylvania on oil prices. You don't just whip out your cell phone and call the branch manager and say, hey, lower the prices, run this guy out of business. I mean, there's no accounting, there's no org charts, there's no salaried managers. We don't even have the telegraph yet. We don't have shit, right? And like Rockefeller is building a company against that backdrop. And then, you know, JP Morgan's like, well, there's nobody who has enough money to own a transcontinental railroad, so maybe I should do this thing where you create these fractional units of ownership of a company, we'll call it stock. You're some guy who sells, you're a blacksmith in 1820, and somebody says, do you want to buy stock in a railroad? You're like, what good does that do me? Stock in some random company doesn't exist? Why would I want that? And so, like, but what happened was the modern corporation emerged, and it drove the standard of living of humanity 13-fold from the year 1820 to 2000. The richest man in America in 1870 was Cornelius Vanderbilt. He didn't have flushing toilets. He didn't have running water. He didn't have electricity. You can have all those three things now and be defined as poor. And so I look at it and I'm like, people say capitalism is screwed up. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm like, it's a freaking miracle. It's like in 1800, you had to work 1 hour to get 6 minutes of reading light. Today, you work 1 hour, you get 300 days of reading light. It's a miracle. And you know, there's a lot of stuff that is wrong with how people are practicing capitalism, but free trade and voluntary, you know, I have this to offer, you have that to offer, we get to trade without somebody interfering, that's not the problem. That's not the problem we have. Well, what I think is happening today, and this is where blockchain gets in.
I'm hearing a little Texas.
Sorry for this shaggy.
No.
I believe that blockchain and things like it, and Moore's law and Metcalfe's law are the fundamental animating forces of what I like to call networked capitalism. And I believe that someday value is going to be created not by creating a large company where you have a lot of employees who work for you and produce a lot of stuff, but instead it's going to be the people who create and curate software-defined networks. And I think that Tesla is a software network-defined car company. I think that Apple was a software network-defined phone company. Nokia thought they sell widgets. Apple thought, no, we sell software-defined phone. The bet between Tesla and GM has nothing to do with who's selling more cars. It's that will Tesla figure out manufacturing faster than GM figures out how to be a software-defined network capitalist company, right? So like, okay, now back to blockchain. There's a book I like a lot called The Wealth of Networks by Yochai Benkler. I read it about 10 years ago, and it influenced my investing a lot. And one of the things that Benkler talked about was we're going to move from the tragedy of the commons to the wealth of the commons. And the examples he used back then, he had Dig in the book, actually, and he had examples of user-generated content in open source software. Well, what if, just like the stock market was a new way to practice capitalism for the modern corporation animated by the railroad and steam engine, that is a new way to create abundance? Because you couldn't have had a national railroad unless you had a stock market. You couldn't have said, hey, who has enough money to build a railroad? There was no one person who did. And so now I believe that crypto has the opportunity to create the wealth of the commons. And rather than a centrally organized equity capital structure, you have a set of people who contribute to a project on their own volition. And if the other people, their peers in the community, judge their value as compelling, they get rewarded. So it's kind of like the wealth of the commons. But like, I find it easier to think about crypto not through the lens of, oh, so are you going to invest in a crypto company? How many shares are you going to own? That's wrong. That's like asking, how many dollars am I going to own in the Transcontinental Railroad? No, stock units are a new thing.
Yeah, it's a different unit.
Crypto tokens are a new thing. They are a new way to create wealth. They are a new way to leverage the wealth of networks rather than vertically integrated, top-down owned companies. And so, like, I just believe that 100 years from now, tokens or something like them will be one of many ways that a enterprising capitalist can create abundance in the world. And the more ways we can create abundance, the better.
Does that obliterate venture capital as we know it, or does it just reconfigure it so that you guys are investing in the pickaxes?
Yeah, so like I don't really, it's funny, so like I'm friends with Vinny Lingham who did Civic, and the first time we met, he's like, hey, ICOs make you irrelevant, but I'm happy to give you courtesy of my time. And I'm like, Vinny, like, look, I'm just not afraid of what's going to be done to me. The question I asked today is, what would J.P. Morgan do if he's alive? J.P. Morgan wouldn't be like, oh, how am I going to get disrupted? Oh, gee. He'd be like, how can I play offense with crypto? And how can I create new businesses rather than, you know, like Elvis didn't say, I'm going to disrupt jazz, right? He wanted to create rock and roll. And like when I look about crypto, I'm like, what would Elvis think? What would J.P. Morgan think? I think disruption in tech startups is kind of bullshit. None of the tech startups I've invested in had people who said, you know, Logan and John didn't say death to taxis, right? They were like, ride sharing is going to be awesome. It's going to bring people together and make things better. And disruption happens after you win, almost by accident.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen because you try to defeat taxis. It happens because you transcend taxis. And like, so like whenever people say, I'm going to disrupt something, I'm like, well, you're not a real entrepreneur. Because entrepreneurship comes from love and creation, not from anger and disruption and what am I going to attack. And so like, I'm not going to get disrupted by crypto any more than the next guy will.
So just
Jamie Dimon might. By the way, I'd be happy to debate him anytime and anywhere about
ooh, I like this. It's a rumble in the jungle with Jamie Dimon. I can't wait for this to happen. So just so nobody gets fired, I did get the wrap-up smiley face sign, but I'm going to temporarily ignore that. I apologize. Just so that everybody knows someone has done their duty, and I'm going to continue for a few more questions. And then we'll wrap up. I appreciate everyone okay with that? Cool? Yeah. All right. So I'm having fun with my bud Mike. Oh my God, all of these questions. I wonder if this is the same person. What nascent tech could most disempower the state? Where do you see tech potential for removing government control over the individual? Holy shit, we got a bunch of tech-enabled anarchists in here.
This is one of the reasons I like the wealth of networks, is that the wealth of networks potentially creates the opening to reestablish the idea of trade as a voluntary activity between people. And the government's role is not to own everything or legislate everything or give everybody handouts or free Scooby snacks. It is to protect the rights of people. That's why I believe the valid role of government is to protect the rights of people. Oh. And what we've allowed our government to do is to have unsound practices with how they treat money, right? So the Fed is jacking with the money supply, and it's hurting honest people. If we want to explore that, we can, but like, the Fed jacking with the money supply is picking the pockets of the middle class, and it isn't right. And like crypto has the opportunity to say money should have a price just like everything else. And just like we need to separate politics and religion, we need to separate politics and economics.